I remade Remember by ARTBAT. I'm gonna show you the arrangement and show you how to make the sounds inside the track like this one. Like this one. Like this one. I had one of my students ask how to make one of the sounds in the track. Shameless plug alert. So I decided, why don't I just remake the whole track and show you in a YouTube video? And this way I can also give this project file to my supporters on Patreon. Another shameless plug. If you want to download this project file and have a way of supporting me directly, then you click the link in the description below. And without further ado, let's jump into this remake of this track. The track is 127 beats per minute and it is in the key of F minor. I'm going to go through each individual layer of the track. The sounds that I'm making, I'm going to recreate from scratch using Wavetable and using just stock Ableton effects. And then I'm going to just show you some of the drums. They're pretty simple, so I don't really need to redo all the MIDI and all that. And the track is fairly mixed with the limiter on the master just to make it feel a little bit louder. So let's get started. The kick drum itself is very simple, just 2 layers, the top end and the bottom end. And then a drum bus and limiter to make it feel more compressed together. The kick in the track is actually pretty quiet, so it is a little bit lower on the volume in the mix. And that's about it. Moving on to the bass, I'm going to push this from a sine wave up to a sawtooth wave, bring this down 1 whole octave. I'll change the filter from clean to PRD. I'm going to push up that drive so you get a nice, really crunchy, really aggressive sounding sawtooth sound. And then I'm gonna push that even further by changing this from none to modern and changing the fold and the warp. This adjusts the wavetable and gets it even grittier sounding. Super gritty. It really matches that style that ARTBAT has chosen for this bass. Then I'm going to take a lot of that grittiness out by actually bringing down the frequency, just to get that nice warm bass. You'll see that there is some automation here. That is actually being adjusted throughout the whole track in the arrangement. And it's pretty pivotal to actually adjust this cutoff frequency to make the track feel like it's moving along. And I'll show you the automations and talk about that later in the video. I'll push a little bit of unison on. Sounds nice and wide. I'll open that back up so we can hear how it sounds. It sounds really good, but the thing is with bass, you don't want to have stereo imaging on your low frequency. So I have this EQ here with mid-side turned on. So I have EQ, mid-side mode, and the mid is fine, but the sides, I've actually taken out everything below this area here so that I don't have any bass that's actually in stereo. It's always good to check your master with utility to make sure that it is sounding good in mono. And to me, that sounds fine. Next, I want to just add another layer onto here. So I'll go sawtooth. This time the semitones will be at 0. Saturation to push it up even more. Might be a little bit too much, so I'll dial back the dry wet. Compressor just to compress the sound overall. And then I have, of course, some sidechain compression from the kick. Lastly, some EQing. I have the mid-side again, just really making sure I'm pulling out all this stuff from below, and then some scooping of the mid-frequencies and rolling off the high end. The reason I'm rolling off the high end is because I found that the bass was just too high and too crispy. And it was kind of just taking up space that the lead sound of the track is actually going to occupy, so I just rolled that off. The MIDI itself, very simple, but it really helps to elevate the track with the melody because it plays against the melodies very well. It is F, C sharp, and then A sharp. Very simple, but very effective. The last thing I'm going to do for the bass is actually add a little bit of movement on the top end of the filter using LFO. So LFO 1, I'm going to click on the frequency, bring this amount up just a little bit. LFO 1, turn the retrigger off, and change this from hertz to the actual rate. And let's take a listen to that. See that nice wobble. And it sounds like they're doing that in the track, so I'm going to dial this down a little bit. Still a little bit much, so let's do the amount down even less. Just gives it a bit of movement and it makes it more interesting to the ear and just gives it a little bit of life. You can copy what I did here. Basically, the filter 1 frequency on the bass is very important because it controls the energy of the track. So if I have this bass, it opens up here, and then as the track progresses, it slowly opens and closes. It slowly opens and closes, just like this. During the breakdown, it gets quiet by actually reducing a lot of the high frequencies. And then the final drop, it opens up the bass a lot. This is because by opening up this filter cutoff, you get a lot more energy out of that bass and it feels like more of a climax of the track comparing to the beginning. It just feels more energetic in the climax of the track with more cutoff open on the bass. The drums are very simple in this track. It is just some 16th hats, but they sound really good. The thing is with ARTBAT's drums is that they're usually very simple, but they usually sound very high quality and they really match the tone of the track. So it's using a little bit of attack here on the fade in so that it's not so aggressive of a shaker sound. Makes it not hit so hard. Has effect to actually give it a bit of depth and dimension. And if you don't know what the has effect is, then watch the video up in this corner right here, which explains the has effect in under 60 seconds. Some vocoder on there to actually soften the sound a bit more. You can see I've actually touched in some of the high end and pulled it down a little bit so it's not so sharp. And then 130 release and 48% dry wet. And this just makes it feel more white noise, which is what I thought the track actually sounded like. Some sidechain compression from the kick to add a nice swing and groove. EQ. Again, just touching on the high end, it was a bit sharp, and then of course some reverb. 16th hats. Very simple. The open hats come in later in the track, and they're these kind of like groovy, it's like a kind of like a polyrhythm, I guess, and it just has some different variations of the velocity, some reverb on there, and then just some EQ. In the track, they're very far in the background, so I just made sure to use a lot of reverb and just to dial back the high end so it feels further back. With this high end, the hats feel a little bit too forward in the mix, so you like to roll off the high end, makes them feel further back in the mix and a little bit more hidden. The snare, I layered up 2 snare sounds and made my own snare here. I think it sounds pretty close to the original. Very simple MIDI. The only difference is up here. And then of course I have some reverb as well. The toms are part of like this kick groove, so if I play them along with the kick. Just grabbed any regular tom and I faded out quite a bit. And of course, EQ is very vital for this. You don't need all that high end in the tom or the lows. For the drums, I don't really have much automation, just some output gain on the snare for the build-up, because in the build-up, the snare was much quieter. That's the only thing really for the drums. So let's take a listen to the kick, drums, and bass together, and then we'll move on to the synths. This track doesn't have too many layers of synths, but the synths that are used in the track are really high quality sounding synths. Synths. The first one is this Bandpass arp sound. I think it sounds pretty good, and I think you'll be able to learn from the ideas used to make this sound. I'll loop this area here, grab a new wavetable, throw that in. So we're starting from scratch. Take a quick look at the MIDI. So it's just jumping up from the F to the C to the C sharp to the C. Let's open up the Bandpass ARP itself. So I'm going to change this from a sine wave to a triangle / sawtooth wave so that it has a lot of harmonics, but it doesn't feel like a super saw. First thing I'm going to do is bring that filter down so it's not super annoying. Push up the resonance a little bit. I'm going to add some attack. So it's not really a pluck, it's more of like a softer transient sound. Obviously some unison to make it feel nice and wide. The EQ, again, just rolling off some of that high end so it's not so harsh. And I found that with the effect that I'm about to use, I was getting a lot of frequencies building up here, so I put some EQ there as well. This is where the sound really gets its character from, is this bandpass filter and sweep across the frequencies. Bandpass filter cuts both the lows and the highs, and I'm using some automation here to actually go up and down. So it actually follows from the top and then it goes down, and then again at the shorter part, it does the same thing. So let's take a listen to how that sounds and pay attention to what's happening with this filter. The more I push up the resonance, the more it's going to really push that sound. That kind of spacey, psy-trancey feel. Pushing up the resonance and sweeping across the frequencies with this filter gives that nice kind of spacey, like kind of sound. Some delay, some compression, just in case the frequencies build up with a lot of delay, and then the reverb. Still pretty close to the original. Let's move on to the other sounds, which I'm more confident in. This next one is this Woft sound. Very simple to make. So I'm actually just going to duplicate this one, copy and paste that into here. So I have the same settings as from the Bandpass ARP. I'm gonna bring that attack up a little bit more, maybe around 130, 140. So it has a nice gradual whoa. Bring the sustain all the way down, and the release can stay at 600. Moving on to envelope 2. Envelope 2, I'll bring the sustain down a little bit as well. And then I'm going to push this onto the cutoff frequency. So envelope 2, bring this up to about 80 or maybe close to 80 or 90%. Bring this filter down. Maybe a little bit more attack. So now the cutoff is opening up very quickly. Maybe I can put a little bit of attack on the cutoff. That sounds pretty good. It's opening slowly, which gives you that softer transient. Again, we have some unison from here. Maybe make it a little bit more sawtooth friendly. So it has more harmonics. Have this EQ, which is cutting off some of that high end, delay, and a very big reverb. This reverb has almost 4 seconds. Combining that with the delay, it makes it very nice and atmospheric. This MIDI here, I'll click fold so you can just see what's being played. C sharp, starts with the F, C sharp, G sharp, and G. And starts over. The first note's a little bit shorter. It's actually sounding a little bit quicker of a note as well. That compared to the longer, even though it's very slight, the slightly longer notes open up a little bit more. Just based on the ADSR that I have here. They have more time to open, so they sound a little bit more full. So this Woft part comes in a little bit later in the track, but there is one at the very beginning as the drums come in. Kind of like a transition. Let's quickly jump down to the strings because they're super easy. Basically, I just use this off-world strings preset that comes with Ableton, and then there is some automation on the bright, which the EQ here is controlling just the top end as well with some automation. So that's going to be opening and closing the filters so that it comes in a little bit less bright and a little bit brighter throughout the track. But the strings here, I actually am adjusting both bright and EQ 8 frequency. So the frequency that is at the top, that is filtering out all this high end, it is controlling the brightness of the strings. In the breakdown, it gets cut off a lot for that kind of growl synth to come in. And as the track builds back up into the climax again, it opens up those strings one more time, and it goes along with the brightness as well, following kind of the same idea that the parts of the track are a little bit brighter with the strings and some parts are a little bit darker. I tried to follow the original track as best as possible. Some sidechain from the lead. The lead sound that comes in that you'll learn a little bit later is actually squishing down this one here. So if I just solo just this one and the strings, you can see that the strings are actually being squished, and that is to make room for that lead sound when it comes in so that they're not overlapping too much. The MIDI for the strings is a few different chords overlapping a little bit with some weird timings. C, G sharp, and F, C, A sharp, and F, and then the C, C, and F. And there's some variations later in the track where it's just playing the single chord, and then it comes back and plays those chords again. So if you want the arrangement, you can just pause the video right now and actually copy what I've done here. Or you can click the link in the description below and download the product files for yourself to save you some time. By the way, please let me know in the comments if you want me to make more videos like this one and showing you how to make tracks like these big artists so that you can learn for yourself. The next sound is this really cool growl cinematic sound. I couldn't get it as cool a sound. It might even be using just like a cinematic sample, but it was a really cool sound to make, and it's actually pretty easy. Wavetable, push this up to sawtooth, bring this down 1 full octave. Second oscillator on, sawtooth as well, and I'll just keep that as the octave that it is. Bring the filter down to about 150 hertz, and I'm going to push the sustain up here. Envelope 2, I'm going to actually bring the sustain down to about 30. The attack is going to go up to about 400 milliseconds. So let me just actually push this amount on first. The amount's gonna be about 80 on the filter frequency. Okay, envelope 2, I'm gonna push that attack up to about 400 milliseconds. So it gives us that nice opening of the cutoff. Bring the sustain down a little bit more. Decay, I'm gonna leave quite a bit open. And then I'm gonna have some release as well. I'm gonna push on the unison, make it nice and wide sounding. Nasty. But to get this kind of pitch shifting sound, I'm actually going to turn on this poly to mono, and then I'm going to push this glide up. And what this is doing is when you have notes that are overlapping, then they're going to actually play from one note to the other. It's going to slide or glide down. So if I play this note here, it sounds like this. So it pitch bends and jumps to that next note. And when I have a long time for this, bringing this up quite a bit, maybe to a couple hundred milliseconds. That sounds like a fun house. Pushing this up to about a second and then playing the MIDI here. So going from the G to the F. Sounds pretty close. Put some Camel Crusher on there. Oh yeah. And then to get this nice kind of movement as well, I've actually recorded myself playing with this number 2 node. So I actually just hit record and move this by hand like this while I was recording. And by doing that, it created this nice kind of wafting sound. Lastly, I'll add some reverb. And checking out the automation, I'll put the filter 1 frequency automation back on. And I'm using that to adjust the sound even more and controlling. Maybe I'll put that to a 24 filter instead. That's better. And the last thing I can do is actually adjust the pitch even further with this pitch bend inside of the envelope here. So you go into the MIDI clip, go into envelopes and choose control pitch bend, and I can draw, and maybe I want to drop this down a little bit more. So it gives me even more control over that pitch. Maybe I'll just cut out a little bit of that crispiness and hear it in the whole track. Pretty cool, pretty similar to the original, so I'm pretty happy with how it sounds. During the breakdown of the track, there is this sub melody that comes in with the piano. It's actually just following basically the first Woft sound that I put in. So the MIDI looks like this, same as before with the sound that I showed you over here. And I just grabbed a piano, the simplest piano inside of Ableton, and I dropped it down by an octave, and it just sounds like this. Okay, so now this lead sound. This is the coolest part of the track by far. It's a really nice synth, very Afterlife sounding. It's a pretty simple sound to make, but the complexity of the sound comes with the automation. It kind of sounds like it's almost reversing when it's playing, which is really cool. Let me open up this lead. I'll first show you the MIDI. MIDI is very simple, and what's great about the sound is the delay kind of makes it feel like the notes are overlapping and the melody is a bit more complex than it actually is. Let's start from scratch, wavetable, sawtooth wave. I don't know which waveforms they're using. That's why I'm keeping it simple with the sawtooth. And then I'm just adding in that modern again with about 20% on the warp. Again, making it very gritty sounding. It's quite buzzy right now, pushing up the resonance a little bit and bringing down that filter to about maybe like 500 or 600. And we have the 12 dB filter. At envelope 2, I'm going to push up on the matrix on the cutoff frequency, going to go up to about 80%. Envelope 2, I'm going to bring the sustain down to about 30%. I'm going to change the attack to about 100. You can start to hear it's taking shape a little bit. Decay I'll bring down to about 400. And sustain I'll bring down. And these parameters, the attack and decay, are extremely important for making this really dynamic sound. And you'll see why once I get into the automation. Once again, of course, we have some unison. Camel Crusher, this is a free plugin to download. It's just a distortion plugin that I like to use. If you have Decapitator or if you just want to use the saturator inside of Ableton, that's totally fine too. I brought the mix down a little bit because I've added some mechanical distortion, which is very aggressive. Some EQ. So I've cut out the lows, cut out a little bit of the highs. I've pushed up this area here because I found that the distortion or the wave table or waveform that ARTBAT is using in the track gives this kind of weird, like, I don't know, this weird nasally, like low nasal sound. I couldn't figure out how to do it, but I pushed up this part of the EQ and it kind of made it feel a little bit more like that. And then you just kind of have to find the sweet spot, which sounds good. It's not perfect, but it is pretty close. The delay. And the reverb. So big reverb, big delay, and that, especially that delay, makes it feel like the notes are overlapping and it makes the melody feel a little bit more full and more interesting. But the final project that you can download on my Patreon, I did fine tune and I made sure that it sounded as best as I could get it. Okay, it's sounding pretty good so far, but this is where it gets really cool. So I'm going to actually go back to the amplitude and right click. So I'm going to re-enable the automation on both the attack and the decay. And I want to bring the sustain down to 0. So the decay is kind of controlling how long that sound is dying out for. And I think I just want to pull this down a little bit so it's just off the sawtooth and more of a bit of a triangle. And listen how cool this sounds. I'll zoom into the automation so you can see what's actually happening. I'll actually add this in a new lane so we can see both of what's going on. So up top is the decay and down below is the attack. And let's check this out. So to get that kind of reversing effect, I had to adjust the attack and decay settings so that it would chop them off and kind of roll over each other. And it just sounds like it's kind of getting that reverse effect. It sounds really cool. So basically the decay is just getting a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. I just turned on my pencil tool and I drew this in until it started sounding good together. Sometimes they don't sound good overlapping, so you have to adjust, but I think that it sounds really close to the original and I'm pretty happy with that. In the final drop, there is this detuned layer that comes in for 1 quick sec. All it is this lead sound with the unison actually pushed all the way up. I noticed that in the final drop, ARTBAT put in this extra layer. So this I called the resonant layer. It is a resonant pluck. So it's a typical pluck sound. We have our sawtooth, bring this down, change this to 24, matrix, push this up. We have a pluck, but then there's also a lot of resonance on it. We have our camel crusher. Some auto filter again. So this auto filter, I'm actually using the LFO tool. So it's the same as the other auto filter that I have up there, but this time I'm using the LFO inside and not an LFO from a Max for Live device. Just going back and forth. Basically, it's just doing this. Gives it that spacey feel, cutting out with some EQ, delay, and reverb. And that's only coming in the last drop, just to kind of beef up that lead sound. Let's take a listen to all the synths together with the rest of the track. If you want a full breakdown of ARTBAT style, you can check out this video right here. It was my first one of the How to Make Music Like series. Admittedly, this one over here is probably a little bit better, but still is a similar style.